Hi. So this is going to be video for target A, finding the inverse of tables and graphs. So our success criteria is for every table and graph that I give you, we want to be able to find the inverse of it. So I have a few problems set up. Before we get to the problems, we have kind of this big idea. Whenever we find the inverse of a function, we always want to transpose your input and output variables. And for input and output, what we're going to use here is we're going to use our x and y variables. Okay. So the first problem I have here is a table. All right. Now with every table, we always have our input and output. And ultimately the inverse, we are just going to transpose those. So we're going to switch the orders. So the x's become y's, the y's become x's. We're going to change that order. So in this first problem, the first point on our table of values is 0, -2. So on the inverse table, we're going to have, I guess I don't need the parentheses. Hang on. Okay. So the first input would be -2, and the first output would be 0. All right. And then we would kind of continue on that process. So for the second point, instead of 1, 5, we're going to have the input be 5 and the output be 1. We're going to have the input be a 7 and the output be a 2. The input is going to be a 12 and the output is going to be a 3. So this is kind of like the most basic idea of finding an inverse. If I give you a table of values for all the x and y coordinates, we're going to swap them, okay? Or using good vocabulary, we're going to transpose them to get the coordinates that will be on the inverse. All right, so I have a graph. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to transpose x and y from a given graph. Now, to do this, the best way is to find some coordinates. So if you take a look at this graph that I have a coordinate at -3, 0. All right, I'm going to find as many points as I can. So this next point is going to be at 0, 3. I have a point down here at 3, 0, and I have this little open circle at 8, and we're going to approximate that y value. We're going to say a -2.25. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transpose all of those coordinates to get the points that are going to be on my inverse. So instead of -3, 0, I'm going to say 0, -3. Instead of 0, 3, I'll say 3, 0, and continuing on the process. And this last point is a -2.25, 8. All right, so now we're just going to plot those points and we'll get the graph of the inverse. So at 0, -3, that's going to be on the y-axis right here. At 3, 0, will be on the x-axis. 0, 3, back onto the y-axis. And then -2.25, and then going up 8. We're going to approximate that to be right about here. So now we just have to connect those points. And I'm going to do it in the same order that I plotted them. So I have a little semicircle between these 3 points. And then if I continue on the curve, I have this little piece at the end. So that red graph would be the inverse graph of our original function. Now, there is a relationship between the original function and the inverse. We've said that it is, if you were to take the original function, you rotate it 90 degrees clockwise and then do a vertical reflection. So if you do a rotation, let me use this again, rotation 90 degrees clockwise and then reflect it vertically, that will give you the graph of the inverse. Okay. So that concludes my video on finding the inverse of a table of values or graphs. The big idea here, just to summarize, is that you need to transpose your x and y variables, and that will provide you